In this episode, I will continue my series breaking down safety management systems, and we'll talk about continuous process improvement, or CPI. What is it exactly? How does it support the safety management system? And we'll get into a little deeper into what is systems thinking and how that sets us up to be able to engage in this process of continuous improvement, which is one of the major pieces of a safety management system. We're going to tie it all together and continue this discussion going forward. So look, it's a deep topic, a safety management system. It's huge, so we want to break it down. I wanted to cover it in different episodes, and we're going to continue with part 2 in this episode. So get ready.
Welcome to the SafetyPro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, helping you manage safety one episode at a time. With the constant regulatory and workplace culture challenges businesses face, we'll provide you with all the relevant information necessary to achieve a safer, more productive workplace. No management theories, platitudes, or guru speak, just actionable info you can use right away. Now here's your host, the SafetyPro himself, Blaine Hoffman.
All right, welcome back to the SafetyPro Podcast. As mentioned, continuous process improvement. So we're going to get into that topic. Now, back in episode 80, the one prior to this one, I talked about safety management systems. I defined, what is a safety management system, or SMS, right? I talked about how you need to move away from individual programs thinking about safety as a series of written programs and controls toward a systems approach to safety management. Well, as it turns out, there is something called systems thinking, and we are going to get into what that is and how you can shift not only the way you look at managing safety, but also how your organization can make this shift from managing programs to integrating safety into the rest of the business by using systems thinking. And this is going to set us up for continuous process improvement, right? So I have to talk about this concept, if you will, before we can get into continuous process improvement. It sets us up. Now, recently I came across an interesting article over at The Systems Thinker written by Micheal Goodman. And I thought it would help safety pros better understand what system thinking is all about and how we can use it to set, sort of some context around this thing we are talking about, which is a safety management systems approach to managing safety. Micheal is an internationally recognized speaker and author and practitioner in the fields of systems thinking, organizational learning, and leadership. So his article is called Systems Thinking: What, Why, When, Where, and How. Right? Pretty appropriate. That's why I clicked on it right away, because I wanted to better understand, what others are writing about a systems way of approaching, managing business. In our case, it's safety. Once I get into it, you'll understand it's bigger than that. So I'm going to read directly from his article. I did get permission from Mr. Goodman and the Systems Thinker to use this article, and I will have links to both Mr. Goodman's profile as well as the systemsthinker.com, this article. So be sure to check it out and go check out Mr. Goodman's profile as well. It's interesting, and I bet you the majority of the listeners here will be curious to learn more about how they can make in their organization this shift from silos and individual programs or departments, using air quotes here, to more of a holistic way of looking at the business. All right. So Micheal writes in this article, the discipline of systems thinking is more than just a collection of tools and methods. It's also an underlying philosophy. Many beginners are attracted to the tools, such as causal loop diagrams, in hopes that these tools will help them deal with persistent business problems. But systems thinking is also a sensitivity to the circular nature of the world we live in, an awareness of the role of structure in creating the conditions we face, a recognition that there are powerful laws of systems operating that we are unaware of, a realization that there are consequences to our actions to which we are oblivious. Systems thinking is also a diagnostic tool. As in the medical field, effective treatment follows thorough diagnosis. In this sense, systems thinking is a disciplined approach for examining problems more completely and accurately before acting. It allows us to ask better questions before jumping to conclusions. Systems thinking often involves moving from observing events or data to identifying patterns of behavior over time, to surfacing the underlying structures that drive those events and patterns. So you can see how this sets us up for moving away from simply managing programs towards a systems approach to safety. We need to understand the relationships, the individual safety programs, the components that they have with other areas of the business, right? How people think, feel, and behave when interacting with them. It's also important to understand that, when we use the term system, basically it implies the entire business as a single system, right? We're not really talking about safety. We're talking about the entire business as the single system, and it's composed of many related subsystems, and safety is one of them. Quality is another one, right? So again, change your mind, shift your mindset. The business is the system, and we want to, understand its composition, like the subsystems. And so an accident occurs when a human or even a mechanical part or multiple parts of the system fails or even just malfunctions. The system safety approach reviews this incident or accident to determine how and why it occurred and what steps could be taken to prevent recurrence, right? The goal of a systems approach is to produce, you guessed it, a safer system. Remember that how and why part, because we're going to get back to that. Now, in episode 80, I also talked about how SMS is a continuous improvement process that reduces hazards and prevents accidents. So, what is a continuous improvement process exactly? And how does it actually help us improve safety? Now, to put it quite simply, it's just an ongoing effort to improve products, services, or processes. If we want to put it another way, it's a recurring activity or activities to enhance performance. It's pretty simple, right? And it's also broad. It's very broad. And you can see how it also applies across other areas of the business. Now, typically, the goal is for incremental improvements over time, and in very few cases, major improvements all at once. We'll get into sort of, taking small bites, right? Fail small. We'll talk about that and how it's a part of CPI, or continuous process improvement. So once again, I will use lean principles to explain this concept. First, I want to start with some structure in order to get into this lean principle of CPI. There is a term known to lean practitioners, and that term is Kaizen. Now, the Japanese word Kaizen means simply change for better. There are other variations of that, but it change for better. We're going to use that one. And you may have heard Kaizen, right? This term before in business or in your work. So that's what it means. It simply means change for better and refers to any improvement, either a one-time deal or a continuous process of or iterations of improvements, large or small, in the same sense as the English word improvement. So when you hear the phrase Kaizen Event, that simply means improvement event. So that's probably where you've heard this term. So, probably in quality and engineering, because they, lean manufacturing, it in large part addresses improving processes around making your products and managing out waste and making your processes more efficient and things like that. And if you've listened to my past episodes, you know that I'm a huge fan of using lean in safety. So this is another example of a systems approach to safety. If you're struggling with, okay, I have all my safety programs and I'm managing them and operating them and we review them and people understand them, but isn't that a systems approach to safety? Is it? Not really, not necessarily. So what you also want to do is, when you have that foundation, you also want to overlay with, on top of those across the organization, this ability to problem solve, the ability to continuously look and diagnose issues, not just mishaps, accidents, and failures, but also just identify inefficiencies and look to make your system more efficient. And that's what gets us into the systems approach. Do we have a way to continuously evaluate, right? And look for ways to improve? Do people have the ability to participate in that process? And this is where we start, getting outside of the safety silo, the safety department, and we start collaborating with other areas of the business and integrating our safety programs with other parts of the business. And so we've talked about that, so I won't go down that road again in this episode, but this is what we're talking about, a systems approach. So getting back to my point, if you've heard Kaizen Event, that's what we're talking about, okay? Improvement event. The most well-known example of a Kaizen approach is the Toyota Production System, or TPS, where all line personnel are expected to stop their moving production line in the event of any abnormality. And along with their supervisor, they're required to, it's an expectation, to suggest improvements to resolve that issue. And this is going to initiate a cycle of activity aimed at not just fixing that one case, but rather determine why and how that could have occurred from a systems approach to prevent future issues, not just in that case, but across the organization from repeating. This cycle is defined as plan, do, check, act. So we're going to talk about PDCA and how you can use this approach in safety. All right, so PDCA is a scientific method of problem solving, and it involves a 4-stage iterative cycle for improving processes, products, or services, and for just plainly resolving problems that you might have. So PDCA is something you can use across the organization. It involves systematically testing possible solutions, assessing, results, implementing the ones that have been shown to work. And it's a rather simple and effective approach for solving problems as well as for managing change. If you're always struggling with managing change, I've talked about ADKAR and in the past episodes as a great model for change management. Well, PDCA is a tool you can deploy to that end as well. Look, PDCA is pretty effective because it enables you, your business to develop a hypothesis about what needs to change and test those hypotheses in a continuous feedback loop. And that's why it's a scientific method, right? We're applying some basic scientific principles here of hypotheses, testing, validating, things like that. And you'll be able to get some valuable learning and knowledge just by going through this process. Even when stuff does not work, you will learn a lot. So don't be afraid to try things that, may simply fail. Okay. You're going to learn from that. All right. And the value here, again, is that you're testing improvements on a small scale before trying to apply them company-wide. You want to avoid that disaster, okay, for obvious reasons. the PDA cycle consists of 4 components, and they can be applied to safety management as follows. 1 is plan. Now, this is where we identify and assess risks and opportunities. Remember, because it's not just as a result of something bad happening, an incident or a failure. You could look at opportunities when somebody has a suggestion to improve something. You go through this process. Okay, so identify and assess risks and opportunities, right? And then you do this to establish objectives and processes needed to solve them. So there are actually 3 basic steps to the P part, plan. 1, problem identification. Verify you identified the right problem. You're going to want to determine the impact it has on the organization. Who is it going to benefit? And, in lean terms, you probably have heard this referred to as define your customer. Who is it going to impact? So that's problem identification. Number 2, problem analysis. What info are you going to need to better understand the problem and its root cause? What do we already know? What do we need to collect? Who needs to be involved? Once we get this understanding, is it even feasible to solve the problem? You're going to get to that part quick, okay? Then 3, run your experiments. What are all the possible solutions? I like the 3-option approach. People struggle with this. Like, wow, how do we come up with 3 options? One place you can start, and this is a trick I've used. There are others, but I'm sharing with you what I have used in the past with myself, my projects, and other clients. 1, if we had no money at all, but we still have to do something, what could be a possible option? 2, all right, we have some resources available to us. Not a lot, but we have some. And what then would be a better version of our solution? And 3 is, where I'm headed with this, we have all the funding and support we could possibly need. What would be the best version of that option? So a 3-option approach to me is we have nothing at all, but we have to do something. What will get us what we need? And this works in the event of like an incident or an accident. So this would be an example of a temporary or interim measure that you would need to implement until you can marshal other resources. So that's a great approach to take. So number 3, run experiments. Can you run a small test? What's the best option to run a test with the smallest impact potential, right? Because if it fails, there are some negative impacts to the organization and the culture of seeing that failure, not understanding what that means. So can we do it on a small scale? Can you do it in a simulation, in a controlled environment? Will the small scale results actually scale up, right? Those are all things you got to be concerned with. So P in PDCA is plan, okay? That's problem identification, problem analysis, and problem experiments, right? Run your experiments. D is do. Plan, do. Here is where we develop and implement our tests and gauge their effectiveness that we came up with in the plan phase. Again, these should be done on a small scale to allow us to learn quickly, adjust as needed, and they're typically less expensive to undertake as well. So always start on a small scale or think on a small controlled scale, right? It also lessens, again, the potential negative impact to the business. And this is where I teased you with that phrase, fail small. It will also have less negative impact on the culture as you would with a large-scale test and failure. Workers could feel defeated or that solutions aren't coming, nothing's going to work. You got to be careful with this piece right here. I can't stress that enough, right? So, the bottom line is you got to be able to collect all the data you need so you can objectively decide which ones are best, okay? So getting others involved and making sure they understand what the goal is, the aim here, that also helps minimize the potential cultural impact that a quote-unquote failure would bring. And, I would argue you need to help them define this term. I don't see it as a negative. I would replace the word fail with learn. We're going to run tests. gauge the results so that we can learn more. Because you don't stop. Something doesn't work. You're like, oh, well, I didn't know. You got to go back and try something else. So that we're learning, okay? And that's what you want to do. That's do. Then there's check. PDC, check. Here is where we confirm the results through before and after data comparisons or what other data analysis you want to use. What worked? How can you tell? Also, look at what did not work. This will help you look back at your planning stage to see maybe you missed something or didn't consider something. Remember, this is, again, a cycle. This is even between each of the stages, it's a cycle. You don't just go all the way to the end and then start over, which is what we're going to talk about here in a moment. But you also can stop to go back a stage and go back and check before you get further along. So this is going to help ensure success in the long run, taking this approach. So try not to think of it in a linear fashion. You may discover the solution is no longer viable, and there are simpler ones that you had not considered, and it prevents you from rolling stuff out in the next phase and then having to start all over again. You want to learn if it's not going to work and it's not sustainable early on. So this is where you check. And then you act. PDCA. Here's where you will document the results and make recommendations for future PDCA cycles. If the solution was successful, implement it. If not, tackle the next problem and repeat the cycle again. Chances are, when you're checking in the check phase, you're going to see this. Remember, you can always stop and back up a step or even go into the beginning. You may learn that the problem wasn't defined properly to begin with. This is the final stage. This is where you're rolling something out, and you've already determined through check that it is solving the problem you've defined and is something that you can sustain. It's achieving the results you expected. Again, learning is the objective here, right? So now you could start to ask, what resources are needed to blow up the solutions company-wide? How do we take this, how do we go prime time with this? We know it worked in this department or on this machine or in this shift. Whatever small-scale control test that you use, you've determined that you can scale this works. So now you're going to need to coordinate. We're going to need to do some planning on the next step. So now we've introduced another problem. We have a solution, so the problem changes to, okay, we now need to take this company wide. Maybe it's multiple sites and locations. Maybe it's geographically separated establishments. Maybe it's just across different shifts and different managers. So now we have another problem. How do we roll this out? And you start the cycle all over again. So you can use PDCA just as a loop with everything across the business. You'll start doing this. Even in your head, you'll start doing this. Now, obviously, the more complex problems and processes you have, you're going to have an event with a small team, and you're going to have to manage this. But now we get to this next phase where we may have to start the cycle all over again, but it's a new problem, using air quotes problem. How do we take this company wide? What impact will there be on production, downtime? Are we going to need to train a bunch of people? Are we going to need to replace equipment, parts? Are we going to have to close a part of the building where there'll be contractors involved to come in to do some of these fixes? And, what areas will be needed to be shut down? So all those things you will consider, and you will start this process over again. You will then have to come up with a plan to incrementally ramp this up and roll this out and go through this PDCA cycle all over again. So look, this process, PDCA, it's critical to safety management systems for obvious reasons. Kaizen focuses on applying small, everyday changes that can result in, major improvements over the long run if you do it right. This cycle gives you the framework and structure needed for identifying improvement opportunities and evaluating them objectively. So, when you hear folks talk about a systems approach to safety management and the need to apply a process of continuous improvement, this is what we're talking about. In doing so, You're going to be able to create this culture of problem solvers, right? Critical thinkers and folks that step up to tackle issues and not shrink from them as things that we can't overcome. They're going to be willing to take on the accountability because the process to do it is easy. They understand it. It yields results by taking the focus off of the person and putting it on the process when it comes to problems that arise. Improvement ideas can be tested on a small scale, analyzed, tweaked, and repeated until solved and then taken broadly. People are going to see these small wins and victories, these successes, and how it can incrementally scale up in a controlled way. They move from this whole, oh, they'll never be able to change that. This company's too big and there's just never going to do it, to, wait a minute, there is a process that we can follow that will help us achieve the success we're looking for. We can do this. And that's what you're after, right? That's what you're after. And it's incredible. I'm getting all excited here, but you can do this. I've seen it done. I've participated in this very thing. And it's 180 degrees out of phase for what some people are used to in some cultures. It's a game changer. By going through this process and understanding systems thinking, you can start to see that you need to look at both individual components of your safety program and also the interactions with other areas of the business, how they're interrelated, okay? That system as a whole. You cannot just do one thing. So what I'm saying is, yes, you need to find root causes to mechanical failures, right? Why it occurred. But you also cannot ignore the how it was able to occur organizationally. Now, you need both. But I will say this, if you reverse this thinking, just start with the how, as some of these gurus want you to believe, it still requires you to find out the why, okay? So, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to talk about that in the next episode. I'm going to continue to break down safety management systems by answering the question, what is root cause analysis, or RCA? That's what you're going to get. The next episode is root cause analysis. Again, I will explain how it is critical to support systems thinking, a systems approach to safety, and even talk about how it has been redefined by some of these gurus in our industry that, quite honestly, are selling books or training courses or prop themselves up as thought leaders, when in reality, it's all the same stuff. So if you're just joining the SafetyPro Podcast, I welcome you. I hope you continue to listen. You will find this is a great community, and we want you to connect with us on LinkedIn. So look for myself there, as well as the SafetyPro Podcast page on LinkedIn. What you're going to find is we'll continue to dive into safety management systems in this series, and we'll go even narrower with root cause analysis. Look, systems thinking, continuous process improvement, CPI. We talked about that here. The PDCA cycle. Learn how to use that to your advantage as well. And stay tuned for the next episode where we go even deeper and say, okay, what is root cause analysis and what are some of the tools we use for that? And let's define it. We're going to continue this series breaking down safety management systems. And I look forward to you joining me on the next episode. And until then, as always, be safe.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the SafetyPro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, the all-in-one digital safety solution. For info on how you can request a free demo on all the capabilities of iReportSource to streamline your business's safety management system, head over to the SafetyProPodcast.com. We look forward to helping you manage safety on the next episode of the SafetyPro Podcast.